interesting subject here of creating an inclusive workplace culture and managing Gen Z and this multi-generation workforce. I want to start off by asking you, there's been so much talk about Gen Z. I'm sure a lot of you have many of this group of individuals and employees in your organizations. I just want to ask you, all honesty, when you hear, someone talk about Gen Z or Gen Z, give me a word that comes to mind. Anybody?
Come on, shout it out. Let's hear it.
What? Challenging. Louder? Entitled. Anything else? Efficient. Creative. Tech savvy. Excellent. These are all really relevant. And just to get started, so I'm Janice Allen, you all know me already. Keely, I'd like you to introduce yourself.
Beautiful. I'm Keely, pronoun she, her. I'm the founder of FeelSwell Experiences, and we teach companies how to harness the brilliance of Gen Z or bridging generational gaps. So I'm sure you've seen in the news everywhere. I know we're going to talk way more about it. Some of these labels of entitled, lazy, right? All the different stereotypes. We're probably thinking them. Maybe we don't want to say all of them. I get it. Don't worry. I listened to all of them. But I'm someone that left the corporate world, retail world, actually. I grew up in retail my entire life. I left because of an unsupportive work environment. And I started studying management, leadership, and mental health. And now I'm helping shape the future of work. So I'm really excited for today's session.
Awesome, I love it. Well, we're going to get into it. I just want to set the stage a little. I know we've all heard about Gen Z, but just a few sort of facts based on sort of recent research and things to keep in mind. By 2030, Gen Z and millennials will make up more than half the workforce. They're entering the workforce. They've been entering over the last several years, and they continue to enter the workforce under very different circumstances, as you all know. If you think about the world today and the pandemic and technology, just everything else. They have a very different take on careers and work. They have a lot of options, some that give them much more control of their lives, which they seem to like. We'll hear more from Keely about that. They recently started really entering the workforce, but what's concerning is there are a lot of reports that they're already burned out. Like, no, I've been in 20-some years, you're already burned out. And so I want to know more about this. Keely's going to talk a little bit about that. So the key thing is employers, companies, all of you need to really think about what can we do differently to engage this generation and get the best out of them, attract, retain, all of those things we want to do. So with that, I'm going to kick off and ask Keely to share a little bit about your journey going from college to career, to workplace.
So I want you to picture this with me. I'm 20 years old. I'm about to graduate college, and the pandemic hits. And I'm working my last year of college a little bit with this organization that I was planning to work for, honestly, for the rest of however long. I didn't really know. I really wanted to stay with the company. And I liked what I was doing, but at the same time, what was happening is I was driving 3 hours already to work one way. I was so burnt out by the time I got home. My eyes were bloodshot. My eye was twitching. Have you ever had your eye twitch because of stress? Your eye just starts twitching. And it was this moment where I realized that I look around and everybody else was doing the same thing. And I started to think for myself, do I really want to continue this? So when they offered me a manager position and I couldn't even take care of myself, I thought about this defining moment where I saw my mom standing in the front door and she was tears rolling down her face, also worked in retail her entire life. And she was crying because she was on the way to another back-to-back work trip and she was missing my championship soccer game. And that moment right there, with all of these experiences and then already seeing it for myself, and then the pandemic hitting, I thought, there's got to be a better way that we work together. How many of you think differently because of the pandemic? About your life in general and how you want to live it and the meaning that you have. Right? That was what I started thinking about. And so that defining moment for me was when I knew something has to change. And this is the generation of entrepreneurship and gig workers. And I've been working for myself for the last 5 years. So it is a real case scenario. I'm 25 years old, I'm Gen Z, And it is something that we're seeing if we don't adapt our workforce to what the modern needs are for everybody. So I know we're going to talk more about it.
Yeah, thank you. That is such an interesting story, and I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people in your generation. So the next question I want to ask you, Keely, is what are some of the common misconceptions? We heard some people, what words come to mind, was common misconceptions about Gen Z, and what is the research revealing that are sort of more accurate in terms of what Gen Z is about and what they really value and expect in the workplace?
Right, so we're the ones talking to Gen Z, we're talking to millennials, we're talking to boomers, we see everything, right? Everyone's pointing fingers at each other. They don't understand what's happening. Why is it that they're leaving? Why is it that we aren't able to work together? And so going back to your question with the misconceptions, number one, we hear the entitled one all the time. Number two, that we're tech obsessed. We don't even care about connection. And when we look at those, I want you to think about these stereotypes. Right? These are generalizations, and stereotypes create a belief, and a belief leads to an action. So when you think about that for ourselves, we have to reflect on the different stereotypes that we're saying, because these stereotypes are creating the cultures that are causing people to leave. So when we've done the research and we've actually talked to people, universally, we have a lot of the same values. Right? We started to uncover, and we're talking to people, and someone's saying, I want flexibility, but we're communicating differently. So let me ask you this. Would you ever speak to someone in a language that they didn't understand? I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Probably not, right? It'd be a waste of time. It's the same thing that's happening in today's workforce. We're not speaking the same language. So one of the things that we've seen in the values, we call this flames because it's easier to understand. But if you look at flexibility, right, think about this for yourself in your own lives, and if you want this, right, this is what we've seen with Gen Z, flexibility. We've seen listening and co-creating a space together, agency, meaning, engagement, and community, and then the last one, supportive management. Right, so when we look at that framework and we understand it, those are a lot of the values that we're talking about that everybody's like, I'm on board with that. Who's on board with that? You're like, okay, those make sense to me. But the thing is, we're not speaking the same language.
Yeah, and it's scary to kind of interact like that sometimes. I mean, different generations aren't quite sure how to approach Gen Z, right? Or you're worried you're going to offend someone, and I don't know, some of you face that, but how do you break that down and open that up to say, let's have some better communication? Are there specific things you can do?
Yeah, so here's what we're doing and seeing with a lot of the different companies we're working with. We're seeing specifically that there's two conversations happening. I'll give you a real example, and maybe you can laugh and think, oh, I've definitely heard that before. Leadership came to us and said, I don't know, they don't want to work. They just are asking for $250,000 right off the bat. They don't want to hear this, like, Gen Z wants this raise, whatever it may be. But then we're hearing from the Gen Z person saying, I do want to work here, but I don't know, I feel like they're not paying me enough. And there's this miscommunication on these two different items. So imagine if leadership could say something like, hey, how can we help you create a path forward so that you're successful here? What are the things that are important to you? What if Gen Z could have the skills to say, hey, I really like working here. What's a path forward together, right? And how do we come together and both have the language to understand how we can create a path forward together? And that's really what we're saying is bringing back the human skills is everything. And we're adding that to so many pieces of everything that we're doing.
The relationship building.
Yes.
Getting to know each other as people and having that empathy.
Absolutely.
And that's fantastic. Yeah. Should we go? We have a question already. Do you want to go ahead and see?
Yeah, that's a great question. Have you found that Gen Z wants to climb the ladder, or do they tend to not think about their future in that way? You have to think about Gen Z. You have to put yourself in the shoes of Gen Z. When I was 20 years old, we lost so much of our lives. We're like, what does this mean? How do we connect to people? Is there any trust? We have a different attachment to work because of the experiences we've had. We're digitally native. We have information overload all the time. We're the first digitally native and most globally connected generation that there's ever been. So when you have access to so many options, that's one of the challenges we see. But we see if we can go back to the skills, and I'll talk about this here in a moment, of giving people a new perspective when they're working at your company. saying, you don't have to stay in marketing forever, right? It's giving people options to explore their passions, their talents, because if I knew and I became this accidental entrepreneur, I would still be working for that company if there were different tools and resources, right, to help me get there. So going back to that, when we think about it, there's more options, right, to really support that there's paths forward in different ways, and it doesn't have to look like climbing the ladder. There's options, and we can talk about that, right?
Yeah.
That's a conversation to have.
That's such a great point. And are we creating those? And I would love to hear from the audience too. Are we creating those opportunities to share what those paths are? Because they do want to come in and know that there's something to look forward to. There's some different aspect of the business to understand that's important. It's not just sort of get in, do that job, do the grind, and go home, right? Is that kind of what you're saying? Sort of like, what are those paths? And do we have mechanisms, I don't know, a facilitator or a program, a discussion guide to help guide that discussion between different managers and the new Gen Z coming into the workforce?
Mm-hmm.
So
I think it's also going back to the specifics of like, how do we really focus on each individual? We've made a lot of stereotypes and generalizations. If you look at anything about Gen Z, you're going to see the worst. And what does that do to you? At the end here, I'm going to have a worksheet that you can download, take for yourself, take back to your teams. I really want you to do it because we have to start with ourselves. We have to start asking ourselves, instead of what's so different about the different generations, because every generation, tell me this, every generation has something to say about the younger generation. Right?
yes.
All the time, right? So how can we look at ourselves and start asking those questions of, what are the stereotypes that how can I be an ally to this generation that we want to work with, we want to bring in?
And I think what happens along those lines is that when we don't know, we fill in with what we assume, right? So asking the questions, checking your assumptions, really key.
I know this question here. Are Gen Z employees expecting that their employer teach them soft skills? I have to tell you from my own experience, I felt completely unprepared. I really did. And if I had the tools to connect, if I had, and I love that you said soft skills, because really what they are today, they're so necessary. They're not just soft skills anymore, they're human skills. We all need them, and we all can cultivate them. And that looks like empathy, right? That looks like resilience, compassion. How do we hone in on the specific aspects of this so that we can connect? Because imagine, if I don't have the skills to be able to tell you where I want to go, how can you help me? We're unclear, we're not on the same page. So we have to start speaking the same language.
I love that. Yes, 100%. And this was a question I actually had, which is, what are the key themes that can be used to attract Gen Z, not to, of course, then retain, but like, how do we even set the stage to like, this is a brand, this is an organization you want to come work for?
Well, we learn very differently in the sense that when we're looking at, do I want to go work somewhere? Guess where I'm going? Shout it out. Guess where I'm going to look to see if your company is a good spot for me to work? Did I hear TikTok? TikTok?
And other places, right? Social media.
I'm usually not looking at reviews, not usually looking on Glassdoor, not any of these spaces. I'm looking at TikTok. I want a real live person to tell me what it's like to work there. So your best ambassadors for your company are the people that are working there. So how do you invest in them? How do you pour into them and go, this is what we're going to do, right? This is how we're going to help you and bridge these gaps, because we all can learn from one another. And there can be these aspects of reverse mentoring and all of that. But when we're looking at a company and you're looking to attract, we want to know from the people inside your company that are related and can resonate with us. Because I can tell you right now, I can call up one of your retail stores, and in 2 minutes, I know the culture. I know exactly what it's like there. Because I can say to them, hey, I'm this age. I want to know, what would it be like for me to work there? They're going to tell me, right? They're going to tell me how it is. That's just how we are. We're so transparent and open and vulnerable. And we want to know the real truth. It's like, it slays. It doesn't slay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, slay means it's exceptional. So to be able to communicate like that, knowing that people are going, how many of your companies use TikTok?
Oh, great.
Right, so like be looking on there, because even I could go and look your company name, I could look like employees, and I could see anything that anyone's posting. This is the generation that's taking, their layoffs to social media, taking all these different aspects of sharing and having a voice. So we have to give them that voice, right? We have to be able to hear them and listen and share, because together we really can create a better world.
That's great. They're sharing the good and the bad.
To give you an example, I was recently speaking at a town hall for a company that was struggling with accountability and ownership with their younger employees. Anyone can relate to that? Maybe a little bit? Head nods. Yeah. I see some not supposed to say anything. So that was one of the problems. And after the session, I had so many Gen Zers coming up to me and being like, I can't tell my manager this, I'm afraid to talk to them about this, blah, 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 this is what I'm struggling with. And they find trust in peer-to-peer. So I know for me, right, if I'm taking a survey on how the culture is, I don't know if it's being tracked. Like, I'm afraid. I don't want to be honest. And so you may not be getting those honest answers like you think you are. And that's why we still have these staggering numbers. I mean, globally, 7.8 trillion is being lost in turnover every single year. So it's still high numbers, and I think you mentioned this earlier, 58%. So in the next 5 years, Gen Z and millennials will make up 58% of the workforce, but then the next 2 years, 40% of them are set to leave. People are like, where are they going? Right? We're the generation of entrepreneurship, gig work, doing different things, living in a van, right? All these different scenarios. So we have to think that there's so many more options.
And it's really about reimagining your workplace. Really, maybe this is no longer the way, right, that we need to do something. Maybe we need to ideate and let's do it together with Gen Z, right? Let's talk about these things, and then also have someone facilitate let's develop some ideas. Maybe this isn't working anymore. Maybe we need to do these things. Like, I don't know if anyone here is there anything you can share that you have done that's been successful with Gen Z in terms of having a sense of belonging, inclusion, and engagement? Nothing specific to Gen Z? Okay, we have our work.
I think I heard this yesterday from somebody that was speaking, and it was that we have to break some eggs. It's great that we have certain things that we've always done, but what if we shake it up a little bit? Right? What if we put some fresh energy in there and we try something new and we give it a try and we see if it actually leads to more connection? Because at the end of the day, we've all just experienced extreme isolation. We've all just experienced a world that we didn't even imagine before. So imagine if we could bring that aspect in of more empathy, more connection, more trust. What would that do to your work every day, to the world that we're living in? And I think those are important things that we